She is stronger than anyone I've ever known. Sometimes life is not about surviving. We are far from civilization, a place where the cold bites deep and the wind whispers through the trees like a ghost seeking lost souls. Nathan's cabin sits perched at the edge of the mountains, a solitary refuge in a world that forgot about it. The silence is complete, broken only by the occasional creak of wood settling or the soft crackle of a fire. Snow falls like a blanket, thick and heavy, burying the world in white. Nathan never asked for this life, but here he was alone. The mountains had been his sanctuary for years now, a place to forget everything he'd left behind. No questions, no expectations, just survival day after day in the cold embrace of winter. The world outside might as well have ceased to exist, but that day, something was different. The wind had shifted, carrying with it a strange scent, something unfamiliar yet almost human. Nathan's instincts kicked in before his mind could catch up. He rose, his muscles tense, as his eyes scanned the windows, half expecting an animal. The howl of the wind was muffled now, replaced by the faintest of sounds. Something softer, something that didn't belong in the wilderness. He moved to the door, his hand on the rough wood, feeling the cold seep through the cracks. His breath fogged in the air. As he pushed the door open, just a crack peering out into the whiteness. Nothing. But then, there was a shape. A figure barely visible against the snow, stumbling through the storm, barely standing. Nathan's heart clenched. It was a woman, her form delicate and broken, her steps faltering, as if she could barely keep herself upright. His first instinct was to turn away, to leave her to whatever fate had brought her here. But something in the air, some unspoken plea, pulled at him, urging him to act. He stepped outside. The cold hit him like a slap in the face. He squinted through the flurry of snow, barely able to make out her features. Her clothes were torn, stained with what looked like blood, and her skin had a pale, almost unnatural quality to it. She collapsed before him, her body hitting the snow with a soft thud, her breath shallow. Nathan knelt beside her, his hands trembling as he reached out to touch her shoulder. Her skin was freezing. His mind raced. What was she? Where had she come from? His eyes fell on her face. Her features were sharp, almost otherworldly. She was no ordinary human. There was something about her, something alien. "Hey, Nathan," muttered, his voice thick with concern. "Are you?" She flinched at the sound of his voice, as though it physically hurt her to hear it. Her eyes snapped open wide and wild, filled with a fear so deep that it made his chest tighten. She looked at him for a moment, not speaking, just staring. Then, without warning, she pushed herself away, as if afraid he would hurt her. Nathan's mind went into overdrive. He'd seen plenty of wild animals before, but never anything like this. This was no ordinary woman, he could see that now. Her features were foreign, and there was an intensity in her eyes that spoke of survival, not just of fear. "Wait," Nathan called, reaching out a hand to steady her. "I won't hurt you." But she was already backing away, crawling through the snow, her movements erratic. Panic was setting in, and Nathan knew that if he didn't do something, she would slip away from him into the storm, and the cold would kill her. He couldn't let that happen. Nathan pushed forward, his boots crunching against the snow. He wasn't a man of great strength, but he had the resolve of someone who had spent too many years in isolation to ignore a cry for help. With one hand, he gently caught her wrist, halting her retreat. She froze, her body taut, her breath shallow and rapid. For a moment, neither of them moved. The silence was absolute. Only the wind seemed to dare to breathe. "I'm not going to hurt you," Nathan repeated, softer this time. His voice was calm, his grip firm, but gentle. "Let me help you." The alien girl, as he had come to think of her in that moment, looked up at him again, and something in her gaze shifted, hesitant, wary, but no longer filled with the raw fear that had first consumed her. She nodded, barely perceptible, as if uncertain of his words, but too weak to fight them. Slowly, carefully, Nathan helped her to her feet. She was light, fragile, but there was a strength about her, a potential energy that simmered beneath her fragile exterior, like a storm held back by sheer will. Once inside the warmth of the cabin, Nathan made her lie down by the fire. She didn't resist, but her eyes never left him, watching him with a quiet wariness. She was scared, that much was clear, but there was something else, a quiet intensity that made Nathan uneasy. He'd seen it before, that look in someone's eyes when they were too broken to trust but too proud to let it show. He fetched the supplies he kept on hand for such situations, offering her warm water and a blanket, not knowing how else to care for her. She didn't speak at first, she simply watched him. Her gaze felt like it was seeing straight through him, as though she was cataloging every movement, every twitch, every heartbeat. Nathan couldn't help but wonder who she was, where she came from, and what had brought her to this desolate place. Was she alone? What kind of danger had she been fleeing from? His mind raced with questions, but none of them had answers, not yet. The silence between them stretched, broken only by the crackling fire. Nathan waited for her to speak, for her to trust him with her story. But she didn't. Instead, she simply stared into the flames, her face blank. Then, just as Nathan was about to break the silence himself, her voice broke through the quiet, a soft, fragile whisper, barely audible over the wind outside. "Please, don't let them find me." The words sent a chill through Nathan's bones. Whoever or whatever had chased her here, they were close. And the storm outside, though fierce, was nothing compared to the storm that was about to descend upon them. Nathan's heart raced. Something had just shifted. What had started as a simple act of kindness had just become something much, much more. "You won't have to worry about them," Nathan said, his voice low and determined. "I'll protect you." But deep down, Nathan didn't know if he was prepared for whatever was coming. He'd never been a protector. He had never been called to do anything more than survive. But this girl, this alien girl, she was different, and something about her called to him. "You won't have to worry about them," Nathan repeated, as much to reassure himself as to calm her. Her wide, haunted eyes met his, and for a moment time seemed to slow. She didn't speak, but the weight of her gaze lingered. "You won't be able to stop wondering." The fire crackled softly in the background, casting flickering shadows that danced across the walls of the cabin. Nathan moved quietly around her, offering her water and food, but the girl who he had yet to know by name remained silent, her eyes never leaving him. She sat there wrapped in a blanket by the fire, her posture stiff and guarded. It was clear she wasn't used to being cared for, or perhaps she had simply forgotten what it felt like. Nathan broke the silence first, his voice soft but insistent. "I know you're scared, but you're safe here. I won't hurt you." The girl's gaze flickered briefly to the window, her expression hardening. She had the look of someone who had spent too long looking over her shoulder, waiting for something terrible to happen. Nathan could see it in the way she held herself tense, ready to spring at the slightest threat. She was always watching, even when she wasn't. "You keep saying that," she finally spoke, her voice low and wary. "But you don't know what I've been through." Nathan didn't push. He simply nodded, his movements slow, as he sat down across from her by the fire. He didn't need to know everything, at least not yet. What mattered was that she trusted him, and that trust had to come in time. Trust couldn't be rushed, and he wasn't about to force her to share things she wasn't ready to. "I don't," he agreed quietly. "But I'm here, and I'll help you however I can. That's all I can offer." The girl's eyes narrowed slightly, as if she were evaluating him, testing the sincerity in his words. She glanced down at the blanket around her shoulders, as though it were something unfamiliar, before looking back at him. "You've lived here alone, haven't you?" she asked, her tone suddenly softer. There was a tinge of curiosity in her voice now, something other than fear, though it was still there just beneath the surface. Nathan smiled faintly, leaning back against the wall. "Yeah, for a long time now. It's quieter this way." She gave him a quick glance, her eyes studying his face for any hint of a lie. There was no warmth in her gaze, only a careful calculation. But for the first time, Nathan felt like the tension between them had eased, if only just a little. "It's a nice place," she said, her words almost to herself, as she glanced around the cabin, the simplicity of it contrasting with the cold harshness outside. "Peaceful." Nathan nodded again. "It's the peace I need. And the space. Out there." He gestured vaguely to the snow-covered world outside. "It's a world I don't need anymore." For a moment the girl remained silent, her gaze distant. Nathan could tell she was lost in thought, but he wasn't about to interrupt her. Whatever demons she carried were hers to face, but he would be there when she was ready to speak about them. "Why did you help me?" she asked, her voice breaking the silence like a soft blade. "You don't even know me." The question hung in the air, and Nathan let it settle before he answered. His eyes flickered to the fire, the flames dancing as they consumed the wood. The heat was comforting, but it couldn't erase the emptiness in the world around them. "I don't need to know you to help," he said finally, his voice low as if the words themselves held weight. "Sometimes helping someone is all you need to do. And besides, no one should be left out there in that storm." She looked at him again, her expression unreadable. "And what if I'm dangerous?" The question took Nathan by surprise. Dangerous? She didn't look dangerous. Broken, yes, but dangerous. He tilted his head, trying to read her, his eyes softening. "Maybe you are," he said, "but I don't think you want to be. You're just running. I get it." She stared at him for a long moment, and Nathan felt the intensity of her gaze pierce through him. It was as though she was searching for something in him, something hidden, as if to confirm that he wasn't just another threat. "I'm not running from something," she began, her voice shaky now. "I'm running from everything." Nathan remained silent. He wasn't sure what to say or if saying anything would help. All he could do was let her speak when she was ready. The girl's eyes drifted back to the flames. For a while, the only sound was the crackle of the fire, the wind howling outside, and the occasional shift of the wood in the stove. Nathan thought about what she had said, running from everything. What did that even mean? Who could be running from everything? Finally, she spoke again, her voice quieter now. "I don't remember a time when I wasn't running." She looked up at him, her eyes clouded with memories she wasn't ready to share. "I don't know how to stop." Nathan shifted in his seat, the weight of her words settling on him. He wanted to reach out to tell her that it was okay, that she didn't have to be afraid anymore. But the truth was, he didn't know if he could offer her the safety she needed. He only knew one thing: she had survived. And that was something, even if she couldn't see it yet. "You don't have to stop all at once," Nathan said softly. "Take it one step at a time. You're safe here, and I won't let anyone hurt you." She looked at him, then her gaze softer than before. For the first time, her lips curled into a small, reluctant smile. It was fleeting, almost imperceptible, but it was there. "Why?" she asked again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you do this for me?" Nathan didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned his gaze back to the fire. He could see the reflection of the flames dancing in her eyes, and for a moment everything else faded. The wind, the snow, the cold, it all disappeared. It was just the two of them in that room, trapped between silence and unspoken understanding. "Because you're worth helping," Nathan said simply, his voice steady and true. "We all are." The girl's expression softened, and she looked down, wrapping the blanket tighter around her shoulders as if to hold on to something real, something safe. Nathan didn't know how long they sat there, but as the fire burned low and the storm raged outside, something between them shifted. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was the first step toward it. And sometimes that was enough. The night settled in around them, the cold creeping in through every crack of the cabin. The fire had burned low, but it was enough to cast shadows on the walls, shadows that danced as though they too were lost in a world of uncertainty. Arya sat on the fur rug near the hearth, her posture still tense, yet less guarded than before. Her eyes, however, remained distant, flickering between the flames and the darkness outside. The storm had not abated. It raged with the same intensity as before, as if nature itself were a reflection of her turbulent past. Nathan, who had been tending to the fire, caught a fleeting glance of her, her eyes reflecting not just the firelight, but something deeper, something far older. It was the kind of look someone gets when they've lived through more than any person should ever have to. It wasn't fear anymore. It was something else. Regret, loss. Her past weighed heavily on her, and it was clear she wasn't ready to share it, not yet. But Nathan had learned over the years that the past had a way of surfacing when least expected. He sat down across from her, leaning against the wall, careful not to intrude on the fragile moment of calm that had settled between them. She seemed to feel his presence, her gaze flickering toward him for a brief second before she sighed almost too softly for him to hear. "You can ask," she said, her voice shaky as if the words themselves hurt to say. Nathan hesitated, but only for a moment. "You don't have to tell me anything you're not ready for," he replied quietly. "But you don't have to carry it alone either." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them, as if trying to make herself small hidden. The room was thick with unspoken words, and Nathan was patient. He waited, his eyes soft, giving her the space she needed. Finally, Arya spoke. I don't remember much of where I came from. Her voice was distant, as if she were talking about someone else, not herself. But I remember the cages. Nathan felt a tightness in his chest. Cages. The word echoed through the room like a chilling wind. Where he asked, his voice gentle. Everywhere. She looked up, her eyes piercing through the dim light. I've been sold from world to world, passed from one master to another. Each one treats me like an object, like nothing more than something to be used and discarded. The pain in her voice was raw, and Nathan felt a flicker of anger rise within him. No one should be treated like that, not anywhere, not for any reason. He clenched his fists but didn't speak. What could he say? She had lived through things he couldn't even begin to imagine. I was just a child when it started, she continued, her voice growing quieter. I was too young to fight, too weak to escape. But I remember what they did to the others, how they treated them like animals. Her eyes glazed over, as if the memory were too much, too heavy. I wasn't always like this, she murmured, almost to herself. I wasn't always afraid. Nathan leaned forward, his voice low but steady. You're not like that now. You're stronger than you know. She looked up at him, her gaze sharp, almost accusatory. How would you know? You've never been where I've been? His heart tightened. She was right, of course. He had no way of truly understanding what she had gone through. But he wasn't going to back down now, not when she needed to know someone was on her side. Not when she needed to hear it. I don't know what it's like, Nathan admitted, but I know what it's like to be broken. I know what it's like to feel like you're lost in a place where no one can reach you. His voice softened, his eyes never leaving hers. But you're not lost, Arya. Not anymore. Her jaw tightened, her lips pressing into a thin line. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then slowly, she unwrapped her arms from around her knees and leaned forward slightly, her gaze intense. I wasn't always weak, she said, her voice suddenly tight, like she was struggling against something inside her. There was a time when I was strong, but I don't remember when. I don't know how. Nathan's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the first crack in the armor she had built around herself. The first sign that Arya wasn't just a broken girl, but someone with the power to rise again. He had suspected as much since the moment he saw her move. The way she had reacted to danger. It wasn't the instinct of someone who had been crushed. It was the instinct of someone who had survived. Arya, Nathan began carefully, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and understanding. You don't have to remember all at once. Whatever you're afraid of, you don't have to face it by yourself. Her eyes searched his face for a long moment, as though trying to find the truth in his words. Slowly she nodded, but the wariness in her eyes didn't entirely fade. There was still something she was holding back, something deeper, darker. There are things I've done, she whispered, her voice shaking. Things I don't even remember doing. I remember the fights, fighting for my life, fighting for survival. Nathan's mind raced. Fights, survival. The girl wasn't just running from her past. She had been part of it, part of something that he could barely fathom. He had sensed it all along, that raw power beneath the surface. But now it is becoming clearer. Arya wasn't just a victim. She had been a warrior once. Maybe even still was. Fights, Nathan repeated slowly. You fought for your life. But you don't remember how? Arya shook her head, a flicker of frustration crossing her features. No, it's all a blur. Sometimes I remember a weapon in my hand, a battle, the sound of something dying. But I don't know why. I don't know who I was fighting. It's all just... She stopped herself, the words failing her. Nathan leaned forward. Arya, he said softly, his voice filled with something like hope. You're more than what you think you are. You've survived because there's something inside you, something you haven't fully realized yet. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, the storm outside seemed to intensify, as though echoing her inner turmoil. Arya wasn't just broken. She was someone who had been forced to bury something powerful inside her, something that would one day awaken. Nathan could see it now. He could feel it in the air. Whatever had made her the way she was, whatever had made her afraid, it wasn't the whole story. There was strength in her. It was just waiting to be unleashed, and Nathan would be there when it happened. The night stretched on thick with the tension of unspoken words and the crackling of the fire. The storm outside had intensified, but in the cabin there was a strange stillness. The world seemed to fade into the background as Arya and Nathan sat together in the quiet, both lost in their thoughts. Arya, her face hidden in shadow, seemed to whirl away, her eyes staring into the flames as though they could reveal the answers she sought. Nathan sat across from her, watching her every movement with a quiet intensity. He had seen it, the flicker of something beneath her, fear, the momentary spark of strength that shone through when she spoke of the fights, the battles. He didn't know what it was, but he felt it in his bones. Arya wasn't just a victim of her past. She was something more. He couldn't ignore it anymore. She wasn't just a broken girl, she was a survivor. And whatever lay buried inside her, he could see the potential for something incredible. Arya, Nathan said softly, breaking the silence, his voice careful, almost hesitant. I know you've been through things no one should ever have to endure, but I believe there's more to you. You've been hiding it, haven't you? Her eyes snapped to him, wide and alert, as if he had just triggered something deep within her. But there was no anger in her expression, only that same wariness, that deep-rooted uncertainty. She didn't speak, but her gaze was enough. Nathan leaned forward, his tone low and steady. I've seen the way you move, how you react when danger comes. You're not just afraid, Arya. You've got something inside you, something powerful. You've fought before, haven't you? For a long moment she said nothing. Then slowly she nodded, almost imperceptibly. I don't know what you think you saw, she whispered, her voice strained. But you don't understand. It's not me. It's just instincts, reflexes. They're not mine. Nathan shook his head, his eyes locking onto hers. It is you. Whatever's buried deep inside you, it's part of you. And I can see it. You've survived because of it. You're not weak, Arya. You're strong. I know it. You just have to let it out. She flinched, a flash of discomfort passing across her face as she looked away from him. I don't want to be like them, she said quietly, almost to herself. I don't want to become the monster they made me. Nathan could see the conflict in her eyes, the struggle between the girl who had been broken and the warrior that lay dormant inside her, the fear of what she might become, of what she might have already been forced to do. He understood that fear more than she could know. He had spent years hiding from his own demons. But now he realized Arya wasn't just running from her past. She was running from herself. You're not a monster, Nathan said, his voice firm, cutting through her doubt. You're a person who's been through hell, but still made it out the other side. That's strength. It's who you are. She didn't reply at first, her fingers nervously twining in the blanket around her. Then after a long pause, she sighed deeply, as though releasing some burden. Her gaze flickered back to him, her eyes softer, more vulnerable than before. Do you really think I can change? She asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathan met her gaze unwavering. I don't just think about it, I know it. You've survived. And that's not an accident. Arya looked away again, lost in thought. The storm raged outside, the wind howling as it tore against the cabin. But inside, the only sound was the quiet murmur of the fire. Nathan remained still, watching her carefully, waiting for the moment when she would finally come to terms with the truth he could see in her, when she would understand her own power. She remained quiet for what felt like hours, her face unreadable as she stared into the fire. Nathan felt an aching sense of impatience, but he didn't push her. He knew this wasn't something that could be rushed. Arya had to come to terms with it in her own time. Finally, she spoke again, her voice barely audible. I don't remember the first time I killed, she said, her words distant, hollow. But I know I've done it. I've fought for my life so many times I've lost count. I've taken lives, Nathan. The confession hung heavy in the air between them. The weight of her words settled like a stone, sinking deep into Nathan's chest. He could see the pain on her face, the guilt that gnawed at her. She was killed. But in her eyes, he could see that it wasn't about the killing. It was about what it had cost her, what it had turned her into. Nathan knew the feeling all too well. He had done things in his past he couldn't take back. He had fought battles that had cost him more than he could ever explain. He had scars both visible and hidden, and he had learned to live with them. But Arya, she was different. She hadn't been given the chance to live with her choices. She had been forced into a world of survival, a world that demanded violence, demanded blood without mercy or reprieve. It wasn't your choice, Nathan said, his voice gentle but firm. You were forced into it, but you don't have to let it define you. She looked at him, then her eyes searching his face, looking for something he wasn't sure he could give, but he would try. For her. I don't know how to stop, she whispered, the vulnerability in her voice cutting through him like a blade. Nathan's heart clenched. He wanted to reach out to her, to hold her, to tell her everything would be okay. But he couldn't make that promise. All he could offer her was the truth that she didn't have to be what they made her, that she could find her own path. You don't have to stop right now, Nathan said quietly, his eyes never leaving hers. But you can take the first step. You can choose who you want to be. That's all anyone can do. The silence between them deepened. Arya's shoulders trembled and Nathan saw a flicker of tears in her eyes. Tears she was desperately trying to keep from falling. He could feel her inner battle, the turmoil of her past crashing against the fragile hope that was just beginning to form inside her. And for the first time since meeting her, Nathan felt a flicker of something else, a spark of faith that despite everything, Arya would find the strength to overcome it, the strength to face her past, to confront her demons, and to take back control of her life. But first, she needed to believe in herself. The silence inside the cabin was suddenly shattered by the howl of the wind, now louder than ever, as though the storm had gathered strength in response to the conversation that had just transpired. Outside, the world was a blur of snow and shadow, an endless sea of white. But for Arya and Nathan inside the warmth of the cabin, the night had shifted. There was something thick in the air, a tension neither of them could ignore. Something was coming. Nathan stood from his spot by the fire, his senses suddenly alert, as if some primal instinct had kicked in. It wasn't just the wind, though the storm outside had grown fiercer. It was a feeling, something deep in his gut, a warning, a presence. His eyes darted toward the window, but the snowstorm outside made it impossible to see much of anything. Still, Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, hunted. Arya, he murmured, his voice low, his gaze never leaving the window. She was still seated by the fire, but her eyes too had become sharp with awareness. She had sensed it too. There was no mistaking it. The stillness of the cabin had become unbearable. It wasn't just a storm now. Something else was out there. Arya, Nathan repeated, his voice more insistent. Listen to me. Do you hear anything? She didn't answer right away. Her gaze had fixed on the door, and for a moment Nathan thought she might say something, but instead she stood abruptly, her posture tense and rigid. Her eyes wide and fearful, locked onto him with a look that spoke volumes. They weren't alone. They're here, Arya said, her voice trembling just slightly, but the tremor wasn't from fear. It was from anticipation, a raw, instinctive readiness. Nathan could see it in her, how her entire body was coiled, every muscle primed for action. The girl who had been broken, who had lived in fear, was suddenly alert in a way Nathan had never seen before. Nathan moved swiftly, crossing the room to stand beside her. Who, he asked, his voice urgent, his eyes scanning the dark cabin for any sign of danger. Arya didn't answer immediately, her gaze still fixed on the door. She seemed lost in the intensity of the moment, her breathing shallow, her hands clenched into fists. There was something different about her now. Her fear hadn't disappeared, but there was something deeper, something buried beneath it. A warrior's instinct had begun to surface, raw and unrefined. The fight buried deep within her for so long was awakening. Not who, Arya muttered, barely audible. What? Suddenly a loud thud echoed from outside. Then another, the sound of something heavy crashing through the snow, something large, something relentless. The hunters. Nathan's breath caught in his throat. His mind raced. They're coming for you, aren't they? Arya turned sharply to face him, her eyes wild with a mixture of fear and something else, something darker. They've always come for me. Her voice shook with barely contained rage. They won't stop, not until they have me. Nathan's chest tightened. He didn't know who they were or what they wanted, but it didn't matter. Whoever they were here now, and they had to be stopped. He was no soldier, but he would do whatever it took to protect Arya. The door creaked as if in warning, and Nathan spun toward it, a feeling of dread sweeping over him. His hand instinctively reached for the nearest weapon, a rusty old axe that hung from the wall. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Arya's eyes caught the motion, and for a moment her expression softened. "You don't have to fight," she said, her voice steady now, but with a tremor of something far more dangerous hidden beneath it. "I can handle them." Nathan shook his head, a tight, determined expression on his face. "I'm not letting them hurt you." Before Arya could respond, another loud thud sounded from the door, this time closer, louder. And then a voice. It was low, guttural, not human at all, but laced with malice and hunger. "Arya," the voice called, a rasping whisper that seemed to pierce through the storm. "We know you're in there." Nathan froze, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. He had heard that voice before. It was unmistakable. The aliens, the ones who had hunted her, enslaved her, the ones who would stop at nothing to drag her back into whatever hell she had escaped. Without thinking, Nathan moved into action, his heart racing. Arya stood beside him, her body stiff as she too prepared for the coming onslaught. "You should leave now," Arya warned, her voice cold, her eyes sharp with something that wasn't fear. It was something much fiercer, like a wolf ready to defend its den. But Nathan wasn't about to leave her. "I'm not going anywhere." The voice from outside came again, more insistent this time, tinged with anger. "You can't hide from us, Arya. We'll find you no matter where you run." Nathan's mind raced. Whatever they were, whoever they were, they knew Arya too well. They knew her name. They had tracked her here to this secluded cabin in the mountains. "There's no place you can hide," the voice continued, its tone almost mocking. "The slave you once were is still inside you. Come with us, Arya. It'll be easier for you." For a split second, Arya's face twisted in a flash of pain, her past rising up to confront her. But then it was gone, replaced with a hard, almost predatory look. Nathan didn't understand what had just happened, but he could see the change in her, the shift from the vulnerable girl to someone far more dangerous. She was done running. "Stay inside," Arya said, her voice like steel now. She stepped toward the door, her eyes locked on Nathan's with an intensity that made his heart pound in his chest. "They won't stop until they get me, but they'll regret it when they try." Nathan's eyes widened as he saw the shift in her, as he saw the fire that was starting to burn in her once broken eyes. He didn't want to let her go, not like this, not into danger, but there was something undeniable in her gaze. She was ready. She would face them. "You don't have to do this alone," he said, but his voice was tight with the knowledge that it was already too late. Arya had already made her choice. With a final look at him, Arya reached for the door, her hands steady her body, radiating a newfound strength. She wasn't the frightened girl he had found on that stormy night anymore. She was a warrior, one who had survived by any means necessary, and now she was about to face the monsters from her past. The door to the cabin creaked open, and Arya stepped out into the storm, the wind biting into her skin. Nathan hesitated for just a moment, but his instinct told him to follow, to stay close. He had no choice. He couldn't just stand by while she faced whatever came for her. As Arya strode into the snow, her movements were purposeful, strong. There was no hesitation in her step, no fear in the way she held herself. She was a stark contrast to the terrified, fragile girl who had stumbled into his cabin days ago. Now she was a force primal, fierce, and ready to face the world she had been running from. Nathan's heart hammered in his chest, a mix of awe and worry flooding him. "Arya, wait." Nathan called, his voice barely audible over the roaring wind. But she didn't stop. Instead, she turned to face him, her eyes hard with determination. "Stay inside, Nathan," she said, her tone sharp but not unkind. "This is my fight." He took a step forward, not wanting to back down, but also realizing that if he forced her to stay, it could be worse for both of them. "I won't leave you to face them alone," he replied, his voice steady. She looked at him for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then, as if she had come to a decision, she nodded, the barest of movements. "Fine, but stay behind me." Nathan's eyes widened at her words. The confidence in her voice was nothing short of astonishing. She wasn't just preparing to fight, she was ready to take on her pursuers, her captors. Something in her had snapped, and that something, whatever it was, had changed her irrevocably. Arya moved forward into the snowstorm, and Nathan followed closely behind. His heart pounded in his chest, but not from fear of the alien pursuers, not from the cold. It was the knowledge that Arya was no longer the broken, frightened girl who had come to him for refuge. She was someone else now, someone far more powerful, though she didn't yet fully understand the depth of that power. The storm howled, but Arya moved through it with ease. Her figure cut through the snow as though she were born for this. Nathan watched in silent awe. She was a force of nature, a creature of the storm. Yet he could sense her inner turmoil, the weight of the past that still clung to her, the memories that she couldn't fully escape. As they reached the edge of the forest, Nathan saw them, the figures moving through the snow, stalking forward with deliberate purpose. The aliens. They were tall, their forms massive and angular, with dark armor that reflected the light from the cabin behind them. They moved like hunters, confident in their ability to find their prey. Nathan's breath caught in his throat. There were at least 4 of them, and Arya, she was about to face them alone. No weapon, no armor, only her raw, untapped strength. But as Arya stood tall, her body rigid, Nathan saw something else in her. Something more than just fearlessness. Her eyes glowed with the faintest hint of something ancient, something long buried. Her stance was that of a warrior, as if she had done this many times before. "You should have stayed hidden," one of the alien hunters sneered, its voice low and menacing. "You can't outrun what you are, Arya." Arya didn't flinch at the sound of her name. Instead, she raised her head, the wind whipping her hair around her face. "I'm not running anymore," she said, her voice low, but it carried the weight of someone who had made peace with their past. "And I'm not your slave." The aliens looked at each other amused, but their amusement was short-lived. The leader, a towering figure with a dark obsidian helmet, stepped forward. "You think you have a choice? You are nothing. Just a weapon we can control, nothing more." Arya's lips curled into a faint smile, but there was no humor in it. Her eyes narrowed, the fire within them blazing brighter now. Nathan could feel the shift in her aura, her presence. It was like watching a storm gather strength before the lightning strikes. "You're wrong," she said, her voice cold and fierce. "I am not your weapon anymore." With that, the air seemed to crackle. Arya moved. It was almost too fast for Nathan to follow. One moment she was standing still, and the next she was in motion, her body fluid, graceful and powerful, her movements an almost imperceptible blur. She closed the distance between herself and the nearest alien, with astonishing speed, her foot kicking up a flurry of snow as she launched herself at him. The alien tried to raise his weapon, but Arya was already on him. Her hand shot out, catching his arm mid-swing, and with a twist of her body, she wrenched the weapon from his grasp and threw it aside. The alien staggered back, clearly surprised by her strength. Before he could react, Arya was already on him again, her fist connecting with his chest in a forceful blow that sent him crashing into the snow. The impact was brutal, but Arya didn't pause. She was a whirlwind, a predator who had been unleashed. The other aliens moved in, but they were slow compared to her. Nathan stood frozen for a moment, stunned by the power Arya had displayed. But then his instincts kicked in. He wasn't going to just watch. He had to do something, anything to help. He grabbed the axe from his side, his hands shaking, and charged toward the nearest alien. He swung the axe with all his might, but the alien dodged, sidestepping with ease. It was only when it turned to face him, a mocking glint in its eyes, that he realized just how outmatched he was. He was no fighter, no soldier. He was just a man trying to protect someone who had already proven she didn't need protection. But that didn't matter now. Arya was still fighting. She moved faster than the others could react, each of her movements precise and deadly. One by one, the aliens were taken down, their bodies crumpling in the snow. The leader was the last one standing, and even he seemed unsure now. His massive form towered over Arya, but his confidence was slipping. "You're stronger than I thought," he growled, his voice low with frustration. "But you will never be free." Arya didn't answer. She didn't need to. Instead, she stepped forward, her eyes glowing with a fierce resolve. The power within her was undeniable now, and it had only just begun to awaken. "You're wrong," she said again, her voice soft but carrying the weight of a promise. "I'm not a weapon. I'm not your slave. I'm free." In a blur of motion, Arya closed the distance between them and struck with a speed that left the alien no time to react. Her fist collided with his chest, and the impact was enough to send him sprawling to the ground, unable to rise. For a long moment, Arya stood over him, her chest heaving with the exertion of the fight. Nathan could see it now, the warrior bloodline that ran through her veins. She was more than just a survivor. She was the descendant of a people who had once ruled, once fought, and now they had returned. And Arya at long last had found her strength. She turned to face Nathan, her expression unreadable for a moment, before a small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at her lips. "It's over," she said simply. Nathan stood still, holding the axe, his heart pounding. "You did it," he breathed, his voice filled with awe. Arya looked at him, her gaze softening for a moment. "No, we did it." And with that, the storm outside began to ease, as if acknowledging the victory of the woman who had risen from the ashes of her past. She wasn't just Arya anymore. She was a warrior reborn. The snowstorm had finally begun to settle, the howling winds retreating into a soft, eerie quiet. The storm, like the battle they had just faced, had burned itself out. Arya stood tall among the fallen aliens, her chest rising and falling with the intensity of the battle, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and quiet triumph. But Nathan could see the shadows in her eyes, the remnants of the fear and trauma she had tried so desperately to bury. She had fought and she had won, but the victory came at a cost. Nathan stepped forward, his boots crunching in the snow as he approached her. He couldn't help the rush of relief that flooded him at seeing her standing there alive, unbroken, and stronger than he could have ever imagined. But the relief was tempered by a new worry, one that had only grown as the battle had unfolded. "You're sure you're all right?" Nathan asked, his voice tight with concern. The question had been lingering on the tip of his tongue throughout the fight, but now that the danger had passed, he couldn't ignore it any longer. Arya looked at him, her eyes dark distant. Her hands, though steady, were covered in the snow and dirt of the battle, and Nathan could see the faint tremor in her fingers as she wiped them against her clothing. Her face, despite the victory, seemed haunted. She wasn't truly free, he could see that now. She was still carrying the weight of everything that had happened to her. "I'm fine," she said, her voice flat, but Nathan could hear the lie in it. He stepped closer, but she flinched slightly, as if expecting him to reach out and pull her in for comfort. But he didn't, not this time. He wasn't sure what to do anymore. She had always been a mystery to him, but now, with her strength and courage so clearly on display, he found himself at a loss. He had always believed that he was the one who needed to protect her. But it was becoming clear Arya didn't need anyone to protect her. Not physically, anyway. "You don't have to lie to me." Arya, Nathan said, his voice quieter, now gentler. "I know this isn't over for you." "Not yet." She didn't meet his gaze. Instead, she looked down at her hands, flexing her fingers, as if she were still trying to shake off the adrenaline of the fight. For a moment, Nathan felt a pang of frustration. He had watched her fight, fought by her side, but there was still so much she wasn't telling him. He wanted to understand, wanted to know what haunted her, what kept her locked inside herself. "Why didn't you let me help Nathan?" Pressed, his voice full of the helplessness he'd been carrying since the moment she'd stepped out of the cabin into the storm. Arya took a slow, deep breath before answering. "Because you couldn't. You don't understand what I'm running from, Nathan. You don't know what it feels like to have your past hunt you down, to have everyone you've ever known want to put you back in chains. I can't be weak. I can't let anyone get close to me." Nathan's chest tightened, the words cutting deeper than he had expected. He had known she had been through hell, but hearing her speak about it with such finality made the weight of her past seem impossibly heavy. "I'm not afraid of you being strong," he said quietly. "I'm afraid of you thinking you have to do it all alone." She met his gaze, then her eyes dark and filled with something he couldn't quite place. Pain, regret. It was a fleeting look, gone as quickly as it had appeared, but it hit Nathan like a physical blow. "You don't understand," she repeated, her voice strained. "This isn't just about surviving anymore. I'm not running from them, Nathan." Her eyes narrowed, her fists clenched at her sides. "I'm running from myself." Nathan's heart stopped for a moment, his mind struggling to catch up with her words. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. Arya shook her head, taking a step back from him. "You wouldn't understand. You can't. I've done things, Nathan. Things I can never undo." The cold, distant look in her eyes made Nathan's stomach drop. He wanted to reach out to her, to pull her into his arms and tell her everything would be okay, but he knew that wasn't what she needed. Not now. Not after what she had been through. The storm outside had settled, but the storm within Arya was still raging. Nathan couldn't fix it. He couldn't make her forget. All he could do was be there. "You don't have to carry it alone." Nathan said softly, his voice full of quiet resolve. I'm here, Arya. I'm not leaving you. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she turned her back to him and looked toward the wreckage of the battle, her eyes scanning the snow-covered ground, as if looking for something that wasn't there. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can stop running. Nathan's heart twisted, and for a moment he wasn't sure what to say. What could he say? He had no answers for her, no simple way to make everything right. But there was one thing he knew: she didn't have to run anymore, not if she didn't want to, not while he was still here. Arya, Nathan said, his voice steady. You don't have to run anymore. I'll help you whatever it takes. I'll help you face whatever comes next. But you don't have to do it alone. She looked back at him, her face softened, though there was still a layer of wariness in her eyes. And what if you can't? What if I'm too far gone? Nathan took a step forward, closing the distance between them. He didn't hesitate. He reached out gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. For a moment she tensed, but then she relaxed, her body stilling beneath his touch. Then I'll stay with you, he said, his voice firm, his gaze unwavering. No matter what happens, I'll stay. Arya didn't answer right away, but Nathan could see the battle behind her eyes, the internal war that was still raging. He knew she wasn't ready to accept help, not yet, but he also knew that she was beginning to trust him. Little by little, she was allowing him in, and that was enough for now. The days that followed the battle felt like a blur. The storm outside had finally quieted, leaving the cabin in an eerie stillness. The snow had thickened, covering the ground like a blanket of silence. Inside the cabin, Arya and Nathan found themselves in a fragile truce, one where words were few, but the shared moments of calm were invaluable. They were both adjusting to the reality that things had changed, maybe forever. Arya had fought with a ferocity Nathan hadn't expected, and the confidence she carried after the battle was palpable. But despite her victory, there was an unsettling quiet about her. She hadn't yet spoken of the fight in any detail, and Nathan hadn't pushed. He knew that to her, the battle wasn't just about the aliens. It was about something much deeper, something from her past she was still grappling with. The warrior inside her had awakened, but it was still hidden beneath layers of trauma, regret, and fear. As the days passed, Arya seemed to settle into a routine of sorts. She would spend hours in silence, staring out the window, lost in thought. Occasionally, she would practice movements, simple stretches, swift strikes in the air, her body responding instinctively, fluidly. Nathan watched her with a quiet reverence, realizing just how much she had suppressed in herself. There was power in her power that she had long buried under the weight of her past, and now it was starting to break free. It was on the fourth day after the battle that Nathan finally approached her. She was standing near the window, her arms folded across her chest, eyes locked on the outside world. He could tell she was struggling with something. There was an unease to her that hadn't been there before. Arya, he called softly, stepping into her line of sight. You've been practicing. She didn't respond immediately, but her gaze shifted slightly to acknowledge him. Her jaw was tight, her posture rigid. I'm not sure it's enough, she said, her voice low, tinged with frustration. Nathan tilted his head. Not enough for what? She turned fully to face him, and for the first time he saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes, a crack in the armor she'd built around herself. To keep them from coming back. To make sure I'm not just running from everything forever. Nathan approached her slowly, the tension between them palpable. Arya, you can't outrun your past, but you don't have to keep fighting alone. You've got something inside you, something that's stronger than anything they can throw at you. She shook her head, her lips set in a thin line. You don't understand. I wasn't just a slave. I wasn't just some victim. I was trained. I was made to be a weapon, but I don't know how to control it. I don't know how to be the person I want to be, not with all of this inside me. Nathan stepped closer, his voice steady but filled with empathy. I understand more than you think. I've been running from my own demons too. We all have a past we can't escape, but that doesn't mean it defines us. You're not the weapon they made you. You're the woman you choose to be now. She looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time, Nathan saw something else in her eyes: uncertainty, but also a glimmer of hope. It was fleeting, but it was there. The kind of hope that comes from knowing that someone believes in you, even when you can't believe in yourself. I've never known anything other than fighting, Arya. said quietly, her gaze flickering away from him. I don't know how to stop. Nathan could feel the weight of her words, the struggle behind them. She wasn't just fighting to survive. She was fighting herself, fighting the parts of her that had been trained, conditioned into her. But he could see something else in her, a flicker of the girl who had trusted him enough to come to him in the first place. The girl who had reached out despite everything and found some small shred of hope. You don't have to stop, he said, his voice soft but firm. You just have to learn to fight for something else. Not just survival, but for yourself, for what you want, what you deserve. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. But as Arya stood there, her arms slowly uncrossing, Nathan could feel her considering his words. She was beginning to see it, the truth he had been trying to share with her. After a moment, Arya nodded slowly. I'll try. I don't know if I can, but I'll try. Nathan smiled, a small, encouraging smile. That's all anyone can ask for. From that moment on, Arya began to train in earnest. She spent hours each day practicing her movements, refining her reflexes, working to bring her strength under control. Nathan helped when he could, offering encouragement, but never pushing too hard. It wasn't just about physical strength. It was about mental fortitude, about learning to face the darkness inside without being consumed by it. As the days passed, Arya's transformation became more evident. She no longer moved with the frantic, desperate energy of someone trying to escape her past. Instead, she moved with purpose, each action more deliberate, more controlled. The warrior inside her was no longer a weapon of destruction. It was becoming something else, a protector, a defender, a woman who had chosen to reclaim her life. One morning after a long practice session, Arya sat down beside the fire, her body exhausted, but her eyes clearer than they had been in days. Nathan joined her, taking a seat across from her, watching her carefully. He could see the change in her, not just in her physical movements, but in her presence. She was no longer the broken girl who had stumbled into his cabin. She was someone else, someone whole. How do you feel? Nathan asked softly. Arya met his gaze, her expression thoughtful, but for the first time there was a peace in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Stronger, not just physically, but, she paused, searching for the right words, but like I'm finally starting to understand who I am again. Like I'm not just what they made me. Nathan smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. I'm proud of you, Arya. She looked at him, her lips curling into a faint smile. It was small, but it was the first real smile he had seen from her in days. I'm proud of myself, too. And in that moment, Nathan knew that Arya wasn't just healing. She was becoming something far stronger than she had ever been before. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, and that Nathan realized was the real victory. The following week was a blur of activity, training, reflection, and a growing sense of unease. Despite Arya's transformation, Nathan could feel a storm brewing. He knew that their brief victory over the aliens had only been a temporary reprieve. The enemies they had fought were no ordinary hunters. They were part of something larger, something far more dangerous. And as much as Arya had changed, as much as she had learned to fight, he knew that their enemies wouldn't rest until they had her back. And sure enough, the signs were there. The quiet had returned to the mountain, but it was an unnatural silence, the calm before the storm. It was early one morning, just as the first light of dawn began to creep over the mountains, that Nathan heard it. The faintest sound, at first barely perceptible against the backdrop of the wind, the faint crunching of snow, the subtle sound of boots pressing into the earth. His heart skipped a beat. Arya, Nathan whispered urgently, his voice low but sharp. She was already awake, already moving, before he could say anything more. Her eyes met him in the dim light, her expression calm, composed. She was ready for whatever came next. Do you hear it? Nathan asked, his voice barely more than a breath. Arya nodded, her gaze narrowing. They're back, she said quietly. It's them. I knew they wouldn't give up. Nathan's chest tightened. He had known this was coming, but now that it was here, it felt different. The air was thick with tension, the kind that presses on your chest, making it hard to breathe. His fingers gripped the handle of his axe, his mind racing. He wasn't a fighter, not like Arya, but he wasn't going to leave her to face whatever was coming alone. Arya looked at him, then her eyes softening for a moment, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at her lips. It was the first time she'd let herself show any sign of warmth in days. "Stay behind me," she said, her voice filled with the quiet authority of someone who knew exactly what she was capable of. But there was something else in her tone now, a trust. She knew he would stand by her, even if he wasn't a fighter. Nathan nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. He wasn't sure what they were about to face, but one thing was certain: Arya wasn't alone anymore. Not in this fight. The door to the cabin opened with a soft groan, and they stepped outside into the harsh morning light, the cold biting at their skin. The snow crunched beneath their feet as they made their way toward the forest's edge where the sound of movement grew louder. Then they saw them, two figures standing in the clearing, their dark silhouettes stark against the white snow. The alien hunters. They were here, and they had brought reinforcements. Arya, one of them, called, his voice carrying through the cold air like a death sentence. It was the same voice Nathan had heard before, the leader, the one who had taunted her during the battle. But this time there was no amusement in his voice, only the cold certainty of a hunter who had come to finish what he started. "You didn't think you could escape forever, did you?" the alien said, his eyes glowing faintly beneath his helmet. "You belong to us." Arya's jaw tightened, her body going still. Nathan could feel the tension in her mind already preparing for the fight ahead. "I don't belong to you," she replied, her voice low, but filled with a defiance that made Nathan's heart swell with pride. "And you'll never take me again." The aliens looked at each other, exchanging brief glances before they began to move. The two figures advanced slowly but deliberately, their hands reaching for weapons. Nathan's grip on his axe tightened. His mind screamed at him to run, to get out of the way, but he couldn't. Not now. Not when Arya needed him. "Arya, stay behind me," Nathan said, his voice low and steady, but Arya shook her head. "No, we do this together." Before Nathan could protest, she was already moving her body, a blur of motion, as she launched herself at the aliens. Her movements were fluid, precise, each strike a perfect blend of speed and power. She was a force of nature, her body honed by years of pain training and survival. Nathan watched, stunned, as she took down one of the aliens, in seconds her fist connecting with his chest with such force that the creature was sent sprawling into the snow. But the other alien was quicker. It lunged at her, its weapon raised. In that split second, Nathan's heart raced. Arya couldn't dodge it in time. "No!" Nathan shouted, rushing forward, but before he could reach her, Arya's eyes flashed with something primal, something ancient. She twisted in midair, her legs sweeping out in a powerful arc, knocking the alien's weapon from its hands before she delivered a crushing blow to its side. The alien staggered, stunned. She didn't stop there. Arya pressed her advantage, her movements fast and decisive. The alien tried to retaliate, swinging a fist, but Arya caught it in midair, twisting its arm with a sharp motion. She slammed the alien to the ground with a force that left no room for doubt. It was over. For a moment there was silence, broken only by the harsh sound of their breathing. Nathan stood frozen, his mind racing as he processed what he had just witnessed. Arya wasn't just fighting to survive anymore. She was fighting for herself, for her future, and she was unstoppable. But the fight wasn't over. As the first alien tried to rise, Nathan raised his axe. The sound of its heavy blade meeting the snow echoed through the forest. But the alien hunter never had a chance to strike back. The blow was enough to incapacitate it. Nathan didn't have to do anything more. Arya stepped back, her chest heaving, her eyes locking onto Nathan's. There was no fear in her gaze now, only strength, only the certainty of someone who had found their purpose. "You did it," Nathan said, his voice filled with awe. "We did it." Arya's lips curled into a faint, proud smile. "We're not done yet." And Nathan understood then. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about freedom, freedom from the past, and together they would face whatever came next. The alien hunters lay in the snow, defeated, but not dead, their bodies twitching slightly, the signs of life still flickering within them. The aftermath of their confrontation had settled quickly, but Arya and Nathan knew better than to believe it was truly over. The wind had stopped, but the weight of the moment remained heavy in the air. They were far from safe. Nathan looked at Arya, who was standing tall, but her breath was ragged, and there was a faint tremor in her hands. The fight had been quick, brutal, and undeniably intense, but she was holding it together. That strength, the warrior she had been, the fighter she had become, was still there, hidden beneath the surface of the girl who had once been broken. But there was something else behind her eyes, something darker, something that made her wary of what might come next. "They're not just going to leave us alone," Arya said, her voice low, almost grim. "This was just the beginning. They know now that I'm here." Nathan nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "You think they'll come back in force?" "Not just them," she said, looking out toward the mountains in the distance. "I don't think these were just random hunters. They were sent, and they won't stop until they've captured me. I know their methods." Nathan's gut twisted. He had known the moment he saw those hunters that they weren't alone. Arya was right, they were being hunted by something much bigger than the two of them, and he had no idea just how deep the web stretched. "We can't keep running," Arya continued, turning back to face him. "Not forever. We need to fight back. We need to go to them before they come for us again." Nathan frowned. The idea of going after the hunters seeking them out seemed dangerous, almost suicidal. But as he looked at Arya, her expression hard and unyielding, he knew that her determination had already made the decision for both of them. "We fight back then," Nathan said, his voice steady. "We take the fight to them. Wherever they are, we'll find them." The tension between them was thick, and unspoken agreement solidifying in the air. There was no turning back now. They spent the next few days preparing. Arya, with her experience, quickly took charge of the planning, and Nathan did what he could to assist. He wasn't the fighter she was, but he could help in other ways. He gathered supplies, food, weapons, anything they might need. His cabin, once a sanctuary from the world, was now a base for their mission. It felt strange, unsettling even to think of this place as a battleground, but there was no denying the fact that it was. Arya had made her stand here, and now they would both fight from this place. By the time they were ready to leave, Arya had transformed before Nathan's eyes. She wasn't the broken girl she had once been, but a woman full of purpose, sharp-eyed and resolute. She had become the very thing she had feared, the warrior she had been trained to be, and yet Nathan could see it. She was reclaiming that strength, turning it into something she controlled, not something that controlled her. She was ready. He could feel it in the air, the tension that had built up between them, the shared sense of purpose. The journey was long, and every step forward felt like a weight being added to their shoulders. They kept to the shadows, always alert, always watching, knowing that they were being hunted. But Arya moved with a quiet determination, a warrior who knew what needed to be done. By the time they reached the edge of the mountains, the harsh terrain behind them had given way to an open expanse, a place where they could see the world stretching out before them. The silence of the snow was deafening, but it was in that silence that Arya spoke again. "They'll be here soon," she said, her voice steady, but tinged with an undercurrent of anticipation. "They won't let us get away again." Nathan looked at her, feeling the weight of her words. "Then we're ready," he replied, his voice resolute. It wasn't a boast, just a simple truth. They were ready. For the first time, he believed it. Arya, the girl who had stumbled into his cabin all those weeks ago, was now a warrior, and he had become something more too. He had become the man who stood by her, not out of obligation, but because he believed in what they were doing. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting for something much more important: freedom. As they reached the clearing, Arya stopped and raised her hand, signaling for Nathan to do the same. The silence had returned, but it was no longer comforting. Something was out there, something watching them. The unmistakable feeling of being hunted had returned. They waited, their breath visible in the air, the cold biting at their faces. Arya's eyes scanned the horizon, her posture stiff but poised. She was prepared, ready for whatever was coming. Then they heard it. A low rumble in the distance, a sound that vibrated in Nathan's chest. Something large was moving through the snow. It wasn't the wind. It was something far more deliberate. "Arya," Nathan whispered, his heart racing. "They're here." Arya nodded, once her face set with determination. "We fight," she said simply. And just like that, the moment they had prepared for had arrived. The first of the hunters appeared, emerging from the swirling snow, its massive form coming into view. More followed. Nathan's heart sank as he saw them, their silhouettes looming in the snow, taller and more menacing than before. There were more this time, and they were ready. The battle was about to begin. The air crackled with the tension of what was about to unfold. The hunters, larger, more menacing than before, approached with deliberate steps, their heavy boots sinking into the snow. There were 5 of them now, their armor glinting dully under the gray sky, and Nathan felt an uncomfortable tightening in his chest. He was no soldier. He wasn't trained for this. But Arya was ready. He could see the fire in her eyes, the quiet certainty in the way she moved. She had already prepared for this moment for what was to come. Nathan, for all his determination to stand by her, was merely an observer, though he wasn't going to make the mistake of thinking she could handle this alone. One of the aliens, the largest of them, stepped forward. Its face was hidden behind a sleek, angular helmet, its voice harsh and metallic as it spoke. "Arya," it hissed as though savoring the name. "We have been patient. You think you can escape what you are. You think you can outrun your destiny. But we will find you. We always find you." Arya stood still, her fists clenched at her sides. Nathan could see the tension in her, but she didn't flinch. She didn't back down. "You've already found me," she said, her voice steady, though her breath came out in visible clouds of cold. "And you won't take me again." The alien's tone shifted, its voice full of mocking disdain. "You are nothing but a weapon, Arya. That is all you were ever meant to be. You cannot outrun who you are, no matter how hard you try." The words stung, but Arya didn't show it. Instead, her eyes narrowed. The air around her seemed to thrum with energy, a quiet power that only Nathan could sense. She had already proven herself, but now it wasn't just about survival. This was personal. "I'm not a weapon," she replied, her words cutting through the tense silence. "And you'll see that for yourselves." Suddenly, Arya sprang into motion. The alien hunters moved faster than Nathan could track, but he didn't have to. He wasn't the one to fight here. He was the support. His role was to watch, to help when he could, but above all, to ensure Arya's safety. It had been that way ever since she'd arrived at the cabin, and though it had changed, it had stayed the same. But now, as the fight began in earnest, he knew that the line between the two of them was blurring. She had changed, and so had he. Arya's body moved like lightning, her feet sliding gracefully over the snow as she approached the first hunter. Nathan watched in awe as she twisted to avoid the hunter's strike, her body flowing fluidly from one movement to the next. She was a whirlwind of speed and power, her actions deliberate, calculated, a fighter in every sense of the word. She struck with precision, a quick punch to the chest, followed by a knee to the stomach. The alien staggered back, but Arya was already on him again. Before the hunter could even regain its balance, she was behind him, her arm locking around his neck in a vice-like grip. The alien struggled, but Arya's strength was undeniable. She had learned to harness her power to turn it into something purposeful. Nathan saw the ease with which she dispatched this first hunter, his body crumpling to the ground, unconscious but alive. But there were still more to deal with. As Arya moved to the next alien, Nathan's pulse quickened. The remaining hunters were still a significant threat. He could see that Arya wasn't just fighting for survival. Now she was fighting for something more. She was fighting for herself, for the truth of who she had become. The second hunter came at her with a weapon raised, a long, jagged blade, designed for quick, brutal strikes. Arya blocked the first blow, twisting away as it came down, and then she was on him, her foot sweeping out to knock the alien off balance before she drove her elbow into its side. Nathan couldn't keep up with the speed of the fight, but what he could see was clear. Arya was not only surviving, she was thriving. She was moving with purpose. Each strike, she landed a message. Each movement, a statement of her reclaiming what had been taken from her. Her past, her identity, her strength, everything was coming to the surface now, and she was no longer running from it. But as he watched her fight, something clicked in Nathan's mind. Arya wasn't just fighting these aliens as an individual. There was more at stake here. He could sense it. There was a deeper connection between her and these hunters, something rooted in her past, something they had yet to reveal. Her every move seemed to unlock another layer of her power, another piece of the puzzle that had been kept hidden for so long. She was a warrior, yes, but she was also something more, something far older than even she realized. "Nathan!" Arya shouted, breaking through his thoughts. She was in the middle of a fight with the last two hunters, but she wasn't focused entirely on them. Her eyes locked onto his, urgent, demanding his attention. What he shouted back, unsure of what she needed at the moment. She took a quick glance over her shoulder, her expression fierce. "You need to understand who I am." Nathan's heart skipped a beat as he saw the final hunter raise its weapon to strike her. The world around him seemed to slow for a moment. He understood what she was saying, but in that instant he couldn't focus on her words. All he saw was her courage, her strength, and the alien who was about to land a fatal blow. Without thinking, Nathan rushed forward, the axe in his hands raised high. He swung it with everything he had, cutting through the air. The impact was immediate. The axe collided with the hunter's weapon with a sickening crunch, and the force of the blow sent the alien stumbling backward. Nathan didn't stop. He advanced, his heart pounding in his chest, the adrenaline rushing through him as he swung again, this time, catching the alien in the side, forcing it to the ground. Arya's eyes widened, and for the first time she looked at him with something close to surprise. She finished off her last opponent quickly, then turned to face him. "I told you," she said, her voice soft but filled with wonder. "You didn't have to fight alone." Nathan stared at her, the weight of her words settling into him, and for the first time he understood. It wasn't just about survival. It wasn't just about freedom. Arya wasn't the only one who needed to heal. This was his fight too, and together they would face whatever came next. The fight had ended, but the silence that followed was deafening. The bodies of the alien hunters lay scattered across the snow, their forms barely visible beneath the white blanket that covered the earth. Arya stood among them, her breath heavy, her body bruised but unbroken. Her eyes scanned the area, alert, calculating. It was clear that she wasn't finished. She wasn't finished with the fight, and she wasn't finished with herself. Nathan stood beside her, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. His hands were still trembling from the adrenaline of the fight, the weight of the axe heavy in his grip. But as he looked at Arya, something shifted within him. There was no fear in her gaze, no uncertainty. She was a warrior, someone who had reclaimed her power, someone who had learned to stand tall in the face of her past. The cold had returned, the stillness of the snow creeping back in. But in that moment it felt like something had changed. The weight of their struggle, the danger they had faced, seemed to dissipate in the aftermath of victory. They had fought together, and they had won. "You did it," Nathan said, his voice full of awe, his gaze fixed on her. Arya's lips curled into a faint smile, but it wasn't one of victory. It was something deeper. Something that spoke of relief and release, like a heavy burden had been lifted, if only just a little. "It's not over," she replied softly, her eyes still scanning the battlefield. "But we've won for now." Nathan nodded. He understood. This wasn't the end. It couldn't be. The alien hunters, the ones who had hunted her, were part of something larger, a force far greater than what they had faced. But for now, at this moment, they have stopped them. For now, Arya had reclaimed her life, her power. She turned to face him, her eyes locking onto his with a newfound clarity. "I couldn't have done this without you," she said, her voice steady, but filled with emotion. Nathan opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He had never been one for speeches, never had the right words to say in moments like this. But there was something in her gaze, something that made him realize just how far they had come, how much they had both changed. "You didn't have to do it alone either," Nathan said finally, his voice rough but sincere. Arya's smile softened. "No," she agreed quietly, her eyes lingering on him. "I didn't." They stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of their shared experiences heavy between them. The snow continued to fall, but in the stillness, it felt like something had shifted. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were partners bound together, not just by the danger they had faced, but by something far deeper. Trust, friendship, and perhaps something more. "Arya," Nathan began, his voice tentative. She looked up at him, her expression softening. "What is it He hesitated, unsure of how to put it into words. "I never thought I'd be here, you know. I never thought I'd be fighting alongside someone like you. I thought I was alone always. But you've shown me something. You've shown me that maybe it's not just about surviving, it's about living." Arya's gaze softened further, and for the first time there was a vulnerability in her eyes, a fleeting moment of doubt that she quickly masked. "I didn't know how to live either, not after everything." Nathan reached out, then his hand coming to rest gently on her shoulder. It wasn't just a gesture of support, it was a promise that they wouldn't have to face whatever came next alone. "You don't have to anymore," he said, his voice firm but filled with warmth. "Not if you don't want to." For a long time, Arya didn't respond. She simply stared at him, her expression unreadable, as though she was weighing his words. Then slowly she nodded. "Maybe we'll find something more than just survival," she said quietly. "Maybe we'll find peace." Nathan's heart swelled. Peace. The word seemed foreign to him, But hearing it from Arya's lips made it feel possible. For the first time he believed it. They had fought through the darkness, and now they were standing together in the light. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. The alien hunters would return, and there would be more battles to fight, more challenges to overcome. But for now, at this moment, they have won. Arya had faced her past, defeated her pursuers, and taken back control of her life. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for something greater. "Let's go home," Arya said after a long pause, her voice steady and filled with a sense of finality. "Let's build something. Together." Nathan smiled. For the first time, it wasn't just a smile of relief. It was a smile of hope. Hope for the future. Hope for what they could become together. They turned toward the cabin, the place that had once been a refuge, but was now something more, a symbol of what they had built together. The storm had passed, but a new storm was coming, and they would face it together no matter what. The journey back to the cabin felt different this time. The wind was still sharp, biting at their skin, but it didn't feel as threatening. The world around them was cold, but the warmth between them was undeniable. Nathan walked beside Arya not as the protector, but as a partner, someone who stood beside her, ready to face whatever came next. Arya's pace was steady, and Nathan couldn't help but notice the confidence in her steps. She wasn't looking over her shoulder anymore, wasn't scanning the horizon for threats. She had taken back control of her life, and now she was walking forward with purpose, no longer running from her past, but accepting it as part of her journey. As they neared the cabin, Arya stopped for a moment, gazing at the small structure in front of them. It had once been a place of solitude for Nathan, a sanctuary from the world. Now it was something else entirely, a shared space, a place of safety, and a place of possibility. "It's strange," Arya said quietly, almost as though speaking to herself. "I used to think I would never find peace. I thought it was something that would always elude me." She turned to face Nathan, her expression thoughtful. "But now, I don't know. Maybe I can find it here." Nathan smiled softly, his eyes meeting hers. "Maybe you already have." Arya's lips twitched in the smallest of smiles. "Maybe." They stood there for a long moment, the snow falling gently around them, the quiet of the mountain pressing in. The world felt still, almost like it was holding its breath. But Nathan could sense the change in the air. This wasn't the same world they had entered together, not the same mountain, not the same cabin. This was their world now. Their fight had changed them. Their survival had turned into something more, a bond that was deeper than either of them could have imagined when they first met. Arya took a deep breath and turned back toward the cabin, her expression resolute. "I can't change the past, Nathan. I can't undo what's been done to me or the things I've done, but I can decide what comes next." Nathan nodded, "And I'm here for whatever that is." They reached the cabin and Arya paused just outside the door. The weight of the decision she was about to make hung in the air. The cabin was a symbol now of everything they had fought for, everything they had survived. But it was more than just a refuge. It was the place where Arya could make her choice, where she could decide who she wanted to be. "I don't know if I'm ready to forgive myself yet," she said quietly, her gaze distant. "But I'm ready to start again. Here, with you." Nathan stepped forward, his heart swelling. He didn't have the answers, and he didn't have the power to fix everything for her. But what he could give her was a future. What he could offer her was the promise of standing beside her, of facing the world together no matter what it brought. "I'll stand with you," Arya. Nathan said, his voice firm. "We'll face whatever comes next together." She looked at him, then her eyes softening. The vulnerability that had once been hidden deep within her was there, open for him to see. She wasn't just the girl who had run from her past anymore. She was someone who had faced it head-on, who had fought for her freedom, and now she was standing here, choosing to build something new. Together, she echoed, her voice quiet but resolute. "Let's see what we can build." With that, she opened the door to the cabin, stepping inside. Nathan followed closely behind her, and for the first time, he didn't feel the weight of the world pressing down on him. The air in the cabin felt different, lighter, full of possibility. They sat by the fire that night, the warmth from the flames wrapping around them like a blanket. Arya rested her head against the back of the chair, her eyes closed. But there was a calmness to her now that hadn't been there before. She was still a warrior, still strong, But now she was at peace with herself. And Nathan could see that for the first time, she was beginning to believe that she deserved that peace. "This is it, isn't it?" Arya said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is the life I've been fighting for. A life where I don't have to run anymore." Nathan smiled his heart full. "It is. And it's yours." They sat in silence, watching the fire burn low, the crackling of the flames the only sound in the cabin. Arya's eyes flickered to the window where the first signs of dawn were beginning to break through the darkness. The night was over. A new day was beginning. And as the fire burned down to embers, Nathan realized something he hadn't fully understood until that moment. This wasn't just the beginning of Arya's new life. It was the beginning of his too. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were living. The days that followed their final battle were quiet, calm, almost peaceful in their simplicity. The mountain, once an intimidating landscape filled with danger, now seemed to embrace them, wrapping them in the silence of the deep winter. The world outside was harsh, unrelenting, but inside the cabin a different kind of warmth had taken root. It was the warmth of shared moments, of a bond forged not in words, but in actions, in shared struggle, and in quiet understanding. Arya and Nathan had settled into a rhythm, one that was far removed from the chaos of their past. Arya spent her mornings training her body honed to a strength she had once feared, but now fully embraced. She had found her power, and each day it grew, not just in her physicality, but in the way she moved through the world, with a sense of purpose she had never allowed herself before. Nathan, too, found a new sense of peace. His days were no longer spent in isolation, filled only with his own thoughts. They were spent alongside Arya, building something together. There was a quiet satisfaction in their work, whether it was repairing the cabin, gathering firewood, or simply enjoying the company of the other. The things that had once seemed mundane now felt like small victories. They were building a life, not just surviving, but it wasn't just the external work that had changed. Nathan could see it in the way Arya held herself, the way she spoke. She no longer seemed like someone constantly looking over her shoulder as if expecting the past to rear up and claim her. She had faced it. She had stared it down in the face, and she had emerged stronger. She had chosen her future. One evening as they sat by the fire, Arya spoke in a tone that was more reflective than usual. Her voice was soft, but there was a clarity to it that Nathan had come to recognize. "You know," she began, her eyes fixed on the flickering flames, "there was a time when I thought I would never have a life like this. When I thought peace was a luxury that didn't belong to me, that I didn't deserve it." She paused, her gaze turning toward him. "But I've realized something." Nathan met her eyes, sensing the weight of her words. "I deserve it," she said, her voice steady, resolute. "Not because of what I've done, but because of who I am. And for the first time in my life, I'm choosing to live for me. Not for anyone else. Not for what I was made to be." Nathan smiled, feeling a swell of emotion in his chest. The woman sitting across from him was no longer the frightened, broken girl who had stumbled into his cabin. She was whole, powerful, and free. The transformation had been slow, almost imperceptible at times, but it had happened. And now she stood before him, claiming the peace she had fought for. "I'm proud of you, Arya," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've come so far. We've both come so far." She nodded, her expression softening. "We have. Together." There was a long pause as they both looked at the fire, the warmth of the flames casting shadows across their faces. For a moment, the world outside seemed a distant memory, something they had left behind. The life they had built together felt real, permanent, and Nathan knew deep in his bones that this was where they belonged. Together in the quiet peace of the cabin, they had found something neither of them had thought possible. "I don't know what the future holds," Arya said finally, her voice quiet but filled with determination. "But I know one thing: I'm not running anymore." Nathan turned to her, a sense of finality in his words. "Neither am I." She smiled, then a smile that was soft, tender, but full of strength. "Good. Because this is home now." The weight of her words settled over them like a blanket, the reality of their new life beginning to sink in. The storm had passed. The ghosts of their past had been confronted and buried. They had fought for their freedom, for their right to choose, and now they were living the life they had always deserved. As the fire crackled in front of them, the sound of the wood popping filling the silence, Nathan felt a deep sense of peace. For the first time in years, his mind was clear. He wasn't burdened by the past, by guilt or fear. He was living, and the future, no matter what it held, felt full of promise. Arya leaned back in her chair, her eyes closing as she basked in the warmth of the fire. Nathan sat beside her, his gaze drifting toward the window. The mountain was still silent in the evening glow. The snow, thick and deep, stretched out as far as the eye could see. It was a cold world outside, but here in the cabin, they had made their own. It was warm, safe. And for the first time in both of their lives, they had the luxury of peace. "You're not alone anymore," Nathan murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "No, Arya," agreed, her voice soft but certain. "I'm not." And for the first time in a long time, both of them believed it. They were free, together. The fire burned low, the light of the flames flickering in the silence of the night. The cabin, their home, stood firm against the cold, a symbol of everything they had fought for. And outside, the snow fell gently, the world still and calm. For the first time in both of their lives, they were truly at peace. In the journey of Arya and Nathan, what began as a tale of survival gradually transformed into a story of redemption and strength. Arya, a young woman running from a dark and painful past, finds herself in the care of Nathan, a solitary man living in isolation. What starts as an act of kindness grows into a bond that neither of them anticipated. Arya's secrets, her hidden power, and the trauma she carries gradually unfold, revealing her true potential as a warrior descended from an ancient lineage. Through their shared experiences and battles, Arya learns to reclaim her strength, confronting not only her enemies but also her inner fears. Nathan, initially the protector, becomes more than just a bystander in Arya's journey. He transforms from a man living in isolation to a partner offering unwavering support as Arya learns to stand strong on her own. Together they face dangers that test their resolve, from relentless pursuers to their own internal battles. Each victory, both big and small, builds their trust and solidifies their bond. By the end of their journey, Arya has learned that peace is not a luxury for the deserving, but a choice she can make for herself. No longer defined by the chains of her past, she chooses to live freely, no longer running, but standing firm. With Nathan by her side, she embraces the future with strength and purpose. Their journey proves that no matter how broken or lost, we may feel the power to choose a new path to rebuild, and live fully lies within us all. Together they have found freedom, not just from their past, but from the fear that once held them captive.